Guys, welcome back to a special edition live stream from A&D Mortgage with two of my favorite people, Barry Habib and Max Slyusarchuk. A couple months ago here at A&D, we realized that being the top non-QM lender out there, that it was somewhat of our responsibility to share knowledge that we have in that space. So we started our first live stream experience with a 5-part non-QM webinar mixer, and we heard from a ton of you and the feedback was awesome. So we thought we'd keep it going. We thought we'd keep it going with these live stream episodes to share as much information and education whenever and wherever we can. So I have two very special guests with me today. First, the founder and CEO of A&D Mortgage, Max Slyusarchuk. Max, you're playing the role today as my guest host, so you can add to the commentary that we have with our upcoming conversation with Barry. But you've been in the mortgage space now for over 20 years. You're the vice chairman of the board of the Home Federal Bank of Hollywood, and you have experience in both private equity investment and portfolio management. One question, how in the world do you have time to fit everything in? I know you just came back from vacation, so good for you. You're on mute, Max. The 2021 famous quote of "you're on mute."
Yes, apologize for that. Yeah, you have to do what it takes, right? There's a 24 hours a day work. We'll try to do 24 and a half, 25. So whatever I can do, I have no other choice.
Well, I'm excited about our chat today. Barry, I don't know. So I think you and I met for the first time somewhere around 5 to 6 years ago. And there's one quick story before we get into the housing market. There's one just 60 seconds quick story that I want to remind you of. Back 5 or 6 years ago when you and I first met, at that time I was working for a company and we had just started building our communications team about 1 or 2 years prior to that. One of my copywriters at the time, Lindsay, she just loved your content and learned so much from you. She learned so much from your daily videos. She would rave to her teammates all the time about you and MBS Highway. Your content was the key insight to her experience into the mortgage industry. You were visiting our office one day. Do you remember this, by the way?
Yeah, I know. I think we surprised her with some.
Yeah. So we asked you to just swing by her desk and just say hello just for a second. You went above and beyond and you showed up with a bouquet of flowers. And I'm going to share, I pulled it from your Instagram feed. You showed up with a bouquet of flowers, surprised Lindsay, and it absolutely just made her day. It made probably her year. So I say that to really tell our viewers that you've always been a guy generous, from what I've seen, a guy generous with his time, and you're an absolute gem in our industry. So we're so thankful and honored that you would join us today. So thank you so much for having
Dave. You've been a good friend for a long time, and Max, it's an honor to be with you as well. And that made my day too. So that was wonderful.
That's awesome. So let's jump into it. Max, I'm gonna set you up, Barry, and tee you up with some questions. You talk about this topic all day, every day, especially on your platform, MBS Highway. But walk us through the previous 6 months and what you see for the future in the next 6 months and as we close out 2021.
Previous 6 months, we all know, was really revolutionary. It was explosive, exponential growth. And the next 6 months, we have to understand that we all experienced a period of just great exponential growth that was a gift. It was something that we didn't necessarily plan for. Now, some of us were able to maximize that gift to different degrees, but the next 6 months, I think we could still maintain very, very high levels, but we're going to have to do it more on our own. The gift that was given to us, while it's still out there and very low interest rates, a really good housing market, we've got some challenges. There's a lot of companies out there that have gone public that may have price wars. We may have extraordinarily difficult times in helping our customers purchase a home because of lack of inventory. That's not getting better anytime soon. There's still going to be a lot of bidding over asking price. That's going to bring up appraisal concerns and issues. So we have to differentiate ourselves. On the refinance side, while rates are still extraordinarily attractive, fears about inflation might cause some bumps in the roads for interest rates. So we do have to get more creative. We have to start thinking about debt consolidation. We have to start thinking about explaining to our customers why they should act now instead of trying to wait for the rate that was the lowest rate in history, which they may get in the future. In fact, I think that there's a really high probability that, similar to what I told everybody at the end of 2018 through 2019, that we would see a recession, we would see interest rates. And my prediction on the 10-year Treasury, which everybody thought it was nuts for 1%, and then 0.5% after that, people thought it was crazy on both, but they both came to be. And the 1% we hit, as well as the recession before the lockdowns, I see a similar setup in the next 2 years or so, where it might be sooner than that. We're going to get an extraordinary opportunity with low rates. So all the loans that we're doing today are going to be available to refinance over the next couple of years. So we should just start thinking about that. We don't want to pay lots of upfront points. We don't want to be paying a lot of upfront MIs where it's a choice to choose upfront MI versus monthly. And to the extent we can, you don't want the lowest rate. You want to try and get lower fees, because the break-even periods of those we probably won't reach. We'll probably be in a position to refinance these transactions before 2 or 3 or 4 years.
So the bubble, from what you just said, sounds like all this talk of a potential bubble is somewhat of a myth. Or
so I don't see, look, back in 2006 and 2007, I got a lot of hate mail for saying that the real estate market was vulnerable and don't do loans that were interest only, or certainly don't do negative amortization loans, because I did think that the real estate market was vulnerable. In fact, sold my company, put it up for sale in 2006 and closed in 2007, Mortgage Market Guide. The market didn't make sense to me. It's a very different circumstance. Back then, that person was having maybe 4 or 5 investment properties. Today, it's owner occupied. Back then, you had 116 million households in 2007. Today, you have 128 million households. So it's 12 million more households, but inventory has gone from 3.7 million to 1 million. So 12 million more households, 3 million fewer homes. And the amount of births, when you take a look at from 33 years ago, which represents the first-time home buyer, is escalating like a staircase. So we're going to see an influx of first-time home buyers. That's not to say that people can't become overly aggressive and emotional when they purchase a home and create their own level of a housing bubble. The home's out there for $400,000, and the seller lists it for $450 to see what they could fetch, and you wind up getting in bidding wars and pay $525. Well, there isn't an overall housing bubble, but you may have put yourself in your own housing bubble. So I know it's not easy, but people do need to evaluate things properly, make good decisions, and try to understand at what point in their marketplace, in their zip code, if they're bidding over asking price, how long will it take for the house to come up to be worth what they're paying for it? And what does the future look like from there? And we as advisors need to do that.
Yeah. Max, chime in anytime you want. I've got one. Go ahead.
Yeah. So given that what you just said, what do you think about inflation? All that wars and pricing things, it might lead to inflation with all that money being pumped up to economy. It will take some time to absorb all that cash, right?
So, this is a tough one, Max. It's really a tough one because there's a lot of good arguments for inflation. Now, I'm very blessed that, I'm part of mastermind groups with some of the brightest and smartest minds in the world. And there's very different views on this. One of my mentors, Lacey Hunt, one of the smartest guys I know, really sees that inflation will not persist, as does a good friend of mine, David Rosenberg, so the top economists of the world. But there's other really smart guys and friends of mine that see inflation as being more persistent. Certainly on the wage front, you get wage pressure inflation, and we're feeling it now, but that's stickier. But I think that will alleviate itself because people are being paid to stay home now. You can't get an Uber. You can't get a table at a restaurant as easily because you don't have workers. They can't get people to come in. They'll take anybody. We're hiring. So no experience needed. We just need a body. But we know that what we're seeing right now, because half of the states have stopped the supplemental pandemic unemployment benefit, that those people are already starting to come back. When that ends on Labor Day, it takes a while because then you have to get in the market, find a job, start the job, and then the data is delayed. But I do believe that we'll start to see sometime in October a big drop in job postings versus available labor force. Right now, there's 9.3 million job openings, and there's 16 million people receiving unemployment benefits. I think that will balance out to a more reasonable level, and you'll see Uber prices drop. You'll see restaurant prices. You'll see supply chains start to come back because the U.S. really was creating stuff domestically because foreign goods due to COVID weren't easily imported. Now, the Delta variant is a concern, but we might start to see some imports come back. You might get some price wars there to push prices lower. All of this means to me that most of the inflation is going to be transitory. Now, we got some big inflation numbers, and that's the big concern, right? But if you were to take a look at things associated with reopening, hotels, sporting events, airline prices, and then the chip shortage that's out there, computers, and automobiles, used cars, that component represents a little less than 10% of the economy. And month over month, inflation jumped 5%. If you take the remaining 90% of the economy, prices only went up 0.2% in a month. So look, you can't dismiss it completely. You can't say, okay, well, just forget about it. But what we're trying to say here is that we have some inflation. It'll probably be a little less than anticipated. What does that mean for the Fed? What does that mean for interest rates? Well, Jay Powell's turning a blind eye. I mean, I don't understand him at all. The thing of it is, though, is that when you take a look at our Fed chair right now, he's saying we're far off from stopping these purchases. And the Fed lies, by the way. We called them out on it several times. They said we're buying $40 billion a month in mortgage-backed securities. BS. They're buying $100 billion. And then when we called them out on it, they did two things. They removed it from the NewYorkFed.org. So it says, okay, we're just not going to tell you anymore. And they changed the language to $40 billion a month to at least $140 billion a month. So they're full of crap. And they are buying much, much more. So if they start to taper, which they might do, now Jackson Hole meeting at the end of August, I thought that they might announce this because it's a platform. And even if they do announce it, according to Powell, they're probably not going to implement it until 2022. Now, the debt levels that we have in the United States are so great right now that they will probably lead us towards recessionary conditions or another recession over the next couple of years, which is why I think recessions lead to lower rates, which is why I think you're going to have this refinance opportunity. And one more thing to throw out there, and I know it's a lot, but there is a lot. This is like there's a lot going on. It's very, very hard to piece together, is when you take a look at what the Fed is doing. Before the Great Recession, the Fed's balance sheet had $200 billion, $200 billion. After the Great Recession, it had $4 trillion. We are now at $8 trillion after COVID, okay, on the Fed's balance sheet and growing. $8 trillion. But the Fed, we have to understand, the reason why we don't have massive inflation is because the Fed is not a spender. The Fed is a lender. And you can only lend what people will take. And if you think in your mind of the Fed as a lender, when the Fed's lending money, a lot of it's not being taken up. So much of it is getting trapped in the system as reserves. About half of the differential, $2 trillion there. And then about half of that, think of the Fed as a bank, like a lender. People are paying down debt. So we're seeing banks' balance sheets of what they have outstanding drop by about $1 trillion. But the Fed's up there pushing out these $4 trillion, $2 trillion trapped, $1 trillion being reduced. So we're not seeing this crazy inflation because not all of it is being put to use. We don't have what's called the velocity of money factor. You know, the velocity of money is something people hear about all the time. And the best way to explain the velocity of money is how many times it turns over. If a bank lends money to somebody buying a car, well, if they use it for recreational purposes, that's a drain. Initially, it creates economic activity. The dealer, the manufacturer, the salesperson, they all make money, right, and that's good for the economy. But then that customer is left with a $1,000 a month car payment for the next 5 years. It drains on what they could spend. It has a slowing effect. You get a spurt and then a slowdown over time. Same thing with government debt. But velocity of money means that same person buys the car and they now start driving for Lyft or Uber. And now they make $3,000 a month, which more than covers the $1,000 a month expense and creates 2,000. It's a 3 times multiplier. We're not seeing that. The multiplier effect in this country is the lowest it's ever been at 1.2 times. There is no velocity of money. So that's why I think inflation over time calms down, but some of it will be sticky.
Barry, I just wish you were a little bit more passionate about this topic. That'd be helpful. You probably just covered 90% of the questions that I was going to ask. That's just like, I feel like I've stuck my head out the window going 90 miles an hour. Let me go back to affordability just for a second. I heard you talk about recently the different price points. You know, you've got the lower lower dollar amounts, inventory that really aren't quite, that's not what we're seeing move in the market. Then you've got the properties over $1 million. That's kind of where the demand is. Can you talk about the affordability at those different tiers?
Yeah, everybody's talking about the fact that real estate's not affordable, and they're wrong. Okay, now I'm not saying it hasn't become more difficult in some cases. Of course it has. Prices have gone up quite a bit, and there's bidding wars out there, and that also creates other problems with LTV, because we all know that appraisal is based on the lower of a purchase price or appraised value. And if you bid yourself above appraised value, which is happening in many of the cases, you may now have to incur either MI or additional cash. It creates a heartburn for you. I get that. It's not easy, okay? But that said, when we think about affordability, there is no inventory on the lower end. More transactions are occurring on the upper end. You know, sales above $1 million are up by 200% year over year, but yet sales on the lower end are down 35%. What does that mean? Use the median home price. People confuse median home price with appreciation. And they say, median home price is up 24%. No, that means half the sales occurred above that level, half the sales below, but that's because there's no inventory here and there's more inventory here. Appreciation is still very robust, but it's now 24%. It's 14% currently. 14% is still a lot. So then people say, well, people aren't earning that much in their raises. And they look at hourly earnings. They say hourly earnings are up 4%. That's the wrong thing to look at. Hourly earnings are now what you look at, because you can work more hours, less hours. And now, because the shortage of labor, people are getting paid overtime, time and a half, double time. And because of that, you look at weekly earnings. That's a lot smarter. Now, weekly earnings are not 4%, they're up 7%. So somebody might say, okay, Barry, that's still 14% appreciation, 7%, much less affordable. This is where math comes in. You don't use all of your income for your house payment. If you take a look only at principal and interest versus income, a typical scenario, let's say a home was on the market last year and the monthly payment for just principal and interest was $1,000 a month. Your income would be in the range of $5,000 a month on average to cover that.
Right.
If a year passes and the home comes back on the market, but the price went up, appreciation's 14%, it's 14% higher, now rates are about the same, that means the payment went up 14%. So instead of $1,000 a month, it's $1,140 a month. It went up $140 a month. It's less affordable unless my income went up $140 a month, then I could offset it. $140 a month income increase on a $5,000 a month income is not 14%, 2.8%. We're going up in income now at 7%. So we can more than handle this affordability. I'm not saying there's not problems with housing. I'm not saying it's not difficult. It is. I'm sensitive to it. But to make the argument that homes are not affordable simply because they've gone up in price doesn't take into consideration the right metrics and the proper mathematics to evaluate it.
Okay, so if I would be thinking about buying a house, should I buy now or should I wait?
Max, you know I'm closing on my house next month. I don't know if I want to hear his answer on this.
No, I think you should definitely. I think to the extent that you can purchase a home and not exceed the value of what it is. Look, there's two parts of that answer. If you do find a home, you have to bid over asking price. One of the tools we have in MBS Highway allows you to evaluate that. The question that people don't know to ask, but they should be asking is, okay, I'm paying over asking price. Here's the question you have to ask. Take the emotion out of it and do it scientifically. At what point in the future, how long will it take till the value of the home catches up to what I paid for it? That's the question. And we have the tools to evaluate it because we have appreciation forecast for every zip code, and you can just plug it in and we'll tell you how long it takes. If it would take you 3 months, 2 months, 5 months, 6 months, 8 months, probably a good idea. But what if it takes you 3, 5, 7, 8 years? You should rethink the purchase of that home. You should perhaps try and look for something else. So should you buy a home today is your question, or 6 months from now? To the extent you make the proper evaluations, definitely today, because there's a very high probability that 6 months from now, that home will be more expensive. And if inflation becomes persistent, then you could actually see interest rates work against you as well for the period of time.
Great. So I would like to use your tool at MBS Highway to see what is it about my house. What should I do? Right?
Yes, Barry. Let's segue into that because that's one thing that I'm excited about. I've only been with A&D Mortgage for 6 months now, but I know that Max just has a vision to really bring on whatever tools, resources that we can to our organization as possible. And I know that MBS Highway is a well-used platform out there, and you teach brokers, loan officers, how to become true advisors. Can you talk about MBS Highway just for a minute? Talk about the tools and resources, who it's for, what it's for.
Well, thank you. Just really brief, because I don't want to make this about that, but MBS Highway will just help you be an advisor, help you be smarter. We give you an update every morning so that you can be more scripted and close more of the opportunities you get. Look, this is a game about batting average. How many conversations and how many do you turn into applications? We will help you increase that dramatically. You make better lock executions. We'll tell you when to lock, when to float. We'll put you in a position where there's less pricing exceptions. You'll just be smarter and better than your competition, but you'll also have the tools that you can co-brand. You could do social media tools. You will be able to amplify your message. You'll put yourself in a position where you'll be able to discuss different products in a way where the customer understands you, because you'll illustrate them. You'll be able to use things like, and especially through A&D, debt consolidation is so important. You really take rate out of the picture, okay? You can change people's lives by taking care of their kids' college, taking care of their retirement, even if the rate you bring them to is a higher rate, because you'll be doing things more strategically, wiser. This is a tool that will help you become an advisor as opposed to a salesperson, and not depend on the market to give you a gift. You'll remove your own points of friction within the market that exist everywhere and receive explosive growth. That's why we have a 98.2% renewal rate year over year.
We had, Barry, I'm going to wrap this up. I know your time is valuable, but we just had one question come in, and I'm very interested to hear the answer on this one. I've only been working in the mortgage industry for about 11 years now. I've actually never heard of this. This is from one of our own, Mike Majidian. Do you see 40-year mortgages coming back? I didn't know that was a thing. I've only been.
There was 40-year mortgages have been out there in the past, certainly, and I think they still exist. You can probably still get a 40-year mortgage, but they may gain popularity, especially with prices going up. The thing of it is as you know, as you look at the payment differential, even between a 15-year and a 30-year, there's not that tremendous of a difference. And there's not that big of a difference from a 20 to a 30-year, which is why people like 20-year mortgages. If you take a look to go to 30 to 40 years, the benefit starts to dwindle even further. You do get a lower payment, but it isn't as significant. So that was the problem in the past with 40-year mortgages, is that they weren't really like, oh my gosh, there were more creative ways that people utilized things like buy downs and that type of way to go and take that mortgage and make that payment more affordable. So I'm sure it's out there in certain circles. It probably will be more in vogue as there's the need for figuring out ways to get people to qualify. But I do believe that that's less of an issue than there is to create money to get people a down payment. One of the best ways we could do this, and just the last point here, is take higher rates, get greater premium, pay their closing costs, use the money for closing costs for the additional money to chase that home that they need to do to purchase it with more down, or remove MI cost or mitigate MI cost by doing that.
Awesome.
That's a good idea.
Well, Barry, it's been an honor and a privilege. It's been good to connect with you again. We've connected several times at different stages in my career, and it's great to reconnect again. I just learned that you only live an hour and a half or so from my office, so looking forward to seeing you in the future.
We definitely will. That sounds like it would be a great thing to do. So, Max, Dave, thank you so much for having me on.
It's a big pleasure having you.
do.
It's a big pleasure having you. Thank you so much for all your updates. We believe it's super valuable for all our partners, and we would like to educate and give our broker partners as much as we can. So we'd love to share your resources and all your knowledge to all our friends and partners.
Thank you.
And thanks to all our viewers out there. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you next time.